The real question today is whether Hollywood is ready for its close-up, Mr. DeMille. We are incredibly blessed to have one of the great icons behind the icons that make film what it is in our world and in our lives today. And I've never had the experience, as long as I've been doing Smarter You, where the titles were so swanky that I'm going to kick it over to Ellen Harrington and let her tell us what the things were that she did at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and in the German Institute and Film Museum. So, Ellen, help me out, please.
No worries. I know it's like resume city here.
Woo.
But yeah, so for many, many years, I was at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, head of exhibitions and public film programming and international outreach and film education. And then at the Academy Museum, I was the first director of exhibitions and collections and the founding curator of collections. And then I moved to Germany and ran the DFF, the Deutsches Film Institute and Film Museum, for 7 years, which is a big national film heritage organization with a museum, film archive, library, collections, special touring exhibitions, film festivals, you name it.
I never would have got. I'm so glad we just
Yes.
punted. I'm just going to be honest out there. We tried a couple of times and I just couldn't get through it. So I had to kick it to Ellen, whom I've known forever, 300 million years. We met in the Paleolithic era, I think, is
We
about,
look pretty good,
yeah.
actually, for our advanced age. Yeah.
Not bad for being 26. I mean, really, not bad at all. Um, I am so glad to have you here. You know that we don't spend any time going into anything that is complicated before we let you enlighten us and make us a little bit smarter. So chicken timer is prepped.
Okay,
Two
pressure's on.
minutes on the chicken timer. There's no pressure that you haven't been able to handle in your entire life. So make me a little smarter, would you?
All right. So I don't think I'll need my full 2 minutes, but basically, having heard what I do, my whole world is about getting people out of their house and getting
Mm.
out into the world. And so my super smart idea, which is very simple, is it's so important to seek out and prioritize direct experience. Absolutely, over
Oh, yeah.
mediated experience. And I think this is in our age at the moment, there's a lot to unpack there. We can talk about it for ages, but
Yeah.
I've been screening films and bringing people together to talk about topics and to learn together and to see exhibitions and to travel the world and to go places together to kind of come up with shared vision and make it real. And it's something that everybody can do no matter where you live or what kind of work you do or what kind of day-to-day living you're doing. But when people retreat into, as we can see in the current day, when people can retreat into their silos and their phones and, keep the pandemic going for themselves in a way, this is something that I think we have to take a really firm stand against and to change the way that people look at the way that they interact with everything, whether it be culture, whether it be nature, whether it be other human beings. And the single most important thing is go back to the way it maybe ever used to be, to still use your digital tools, but do not deny direct experience. Leave your house. The artwork the way that the artist intended it to be seen. Listen to first person sources. Read things, touch books, do things that bring you into contact with what is so much more important than what you can get in your home.
Yes, and the chicken timer
I
says
used it.
that's
I used it.
so well, there's a lot in there. And it's a powerful point of view. And I think you coming from your expertise have helped us all, whether we know it or not, experience that, whether it's preserving the great stories that we will be able to see in future generations will be able to see that they may not have been able to see, or simply seeing the experience of having people come together over and over again in those settings and benefit from it, right? There's great research right now on in the neurological world that if you simply get out and walk in nature, your mind is better, it's active, and it's able to do things that you couldn't do before you went for that little walk.
Right.
So,
And it's more resilient. And if you're worried about your
yeah,
health and, dementia and things, you've got to embrace this. But at the same time, it's not just about your future self. It's about like, how are you showing up on a daily basis? What is the level of interaction that you have? And, we're in a society now, obviously, it's super polarized. People are incredibly isolated. Most people don't have a lot of, friends, statistically, when they survey people, a lot of people don't have somebody to physically hang out with and talk to. And you're getting everything off of these fabulous little devices. And I mean, I'm looking at it, I'm guilty, but you gotta find other ways to get your information. You've got to find other ways to be in the world. And this again is like my primary mission is, for example, in the world of film, always trying, if you can possibly, to see a film in a theater the way the artist intended. If you can't, okay, stream it, but try to get out and see it among people. And if you have that chance, like we try to offer, of showing it in a restoration and showing it with the filmmakers, and the filmmakers talk about how it was made, that's your cherry on top. But you can put that into everything in the world. If you're interested in politics, don't just read the opinion sections and, these crazy blogs and stuff. You can read it, but go and hear that candidate speak, go to a political rally, do something that actually brings you into dialogue with other people and into contact with those first person sources. Go see art, no matter what part of the world you live in. You can go, there's probably a little museum or a town sculpture or something, or the library has replicas of art in books, that you can go see, these beautiful colored plates. If you're super lucky, yes, get on a plane, go see that artwork, go see that culture, go eat the food in that country. But if not, if you can't do that, because everybody can't, you can back it up and say, I'm really interested in whatever, Japanese culture, your thing, and go for it in person as much
yeah.
as humanly possible.
I think you've nailed one of those sort of big things, and that is that it feels so overwhelming because so much is competing for our attention all the time, every day, all the time, that we don't understand sometimes how simple it is, what you're describing, which can be as simple as getting, in your car, on a bus, whatever it takes, just to get to a park where there are statues. I mean, what you mentioned as art doesn't have to be curated in a museum. It's great and is in most places that you can find some sort of curated art experience. And getting out is such a beautiful thing. That's a lovely place for us to start as someone who, as we're doing this on social media, which I love the hypocrisy and
A
am happy
great
to say it
access
out loud.
medium. I'm not going to criticize, because it does bring us information. It does bring us thoughts that we wouldn't have necessarily had access to if you're only living in your local place, and it's 100 years ago and you're not able to travel around or whatever. But I think we go too far in that direction. We're spending so much time seeing what is happening in other people's vacation photos, which we know are heavily mediated anyway, because you're not putting the part where your luggage gets lost and you fell down the stairs and embarrassed yourself at the train station. Like that stuff isn't in the curated, you know, uh, you know,
Though I would like to be on that social media site.
I mean,
I would choose the luggage
yeah.
falling down. Yeah, I like
And
that.
actually, there's great videos of people who like are wiping, lots of people wiping out. I mean, it's escapist. And so I'm not arguing it's an either or. I'm saying, if think about what you're actually doing. What are you interested in? What are you trying to learn? What do you do for enjoyment? How do you connect with other people? How do you connect with the things that fire your brain up? And it could be anything. And then say, I don't live in the middle of a city, or I don't have the funds to go on a big vacation. There's, for everybody, there's something you can do. Like you say, get out and walk in nature, and get a book and learn about the birds if you're interested in bird watching. I mean, do these things for yourself, but do it in part because it does work on the health of your brain. It works on the health of your soul. It connects you to other people. It gives you a chance, if you can do anything in a communal setting, walking through a free art gallery, um, a lot of museums have free days. You can do these things without it being costly. Um, but however, whatever your economics, or your logistical situation is, everybody can tap into this and pull themselves a little bit away from being so isolated. And I think that that is a key to helping us understand other people's perspectives. I mean, that's what cinema is so great at, and that's why I love movies, is you're living in somebody else's reality for a couple of hours. If it's a really good movie, it can be from anywhere in any language, but it connects us to our humanity. It takes you on a journey into somebody else's heart and soul. You feel their pain, you feel their anguish, their love, their confusion. And it makes you, especially if you're watching it with other people, you leave with, as you're a changed person. That story has tapped into your fundamental humanity and you've connected to something in a way. So anything, whether it's sport or whatever you're interested in, you can do that. You can connect to your fundamental humanity in this larger way if you stop being so isolated and so mediated.
Well, I think in a way I would counter part way because I want to get practical sort of thoughts. So the initial start, what is going to make me smarter in 2 minutes here today on SmarterUmedia, is not to be lost in the silo and get a chance to really get out and have communal experience. That's kind of where what I think you said. So for us to do that, practical ways to do it are very helpful. The guy who wrote Atomic Habits, James Clear, actually literally gave his phone to the assistant that was working with him, so that she would change all of his social media passwords on Monday, and he would not get the new passwords until the end of the day, workday Friday. And he says that's the only way he got the book written, which I think is one of the most powerful books of actual advice for how to plan your life. So that's one thing. You can just make yourself have those times and plan them in, because it's really hard. Once you start, you go down the rabbit hole. It's a very deep hole.
And the algorithm knows us, and the
Yes.
technology, as we know, is heavily engineered to tap into those pleasure centers of your brain, and it is an addiction. And so you have, once you recognize that, it's not always so easy to cut back or quit or whatever. But again, I'm not arguing to totally abandon it. It's a
Got it.
pretty
Yeah,
hardcore
yeah.
way of going, and
Yeah.
hats off to him for having his whole week to write. But, you know, as much as it's a way to keep us connected, you can text anybody around the world, and you can, DM people that you would never have a chance to meet otherwise. So, think about the ways that it really works for you.
Yeah.
But again, whatever you're passionate and interested in, figure out how to get access to that physically in person.
Yeah.
Don't
Love that.
only or primarily let it come through some kind of curated algorithm.
Well, let's talk about the museum experience, because you've been very much in the driver's seat to help us be compelled to want to go to museums. And things have changed a lot in that space. What is the modern day way that we go about trying to get people to think I should go out of my cave and find my way to your museum?
Right. So museums used to have a pretty different societal function. It used to be a repository of knowledge and sort of things that, on some kind of higher level of um, creative or curatorial or cultural elite had decided was these culturally important works or things that were relevant to the history of humanity or something, and then they collect them and generally don't make them particularly accessible. A lot, 90%
Yeah.
of what museum collections are in storage. And then the things that get pulled out for presentation to the public are driven by curatorial view. And so people end up being, highly educated and really paying their dues, going through this process to get to the point where they get to be the people who go in the storage. And then they get to see what the public, they decide what the public should see. They write these lengthy captions, and that's what we're supposed to receive. And in the
Yeah.
last decade, the museum world has blown open in a totally different way. And some of
Cool.
it has to do with our sense of immediacy and our shorter attention spans and things
Mm.
like that. But some of it really has to do with a rethinking of the public purpose of a museum in the cultural moment that we're in. And so it's a bit about leveling access, and it's a little bit about removing that curatorial layer in a
Right.
way so that the curator is a facilitator rather than a dictator. Because there's a lot of legendary curators in this old time model who they were the ones who said that Picasso good and uh,
Right.
whatever Mondrian bad or whatever they said. So I just was in London, and the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum, has done something that I adore, which is that they got a building over on the campus of the old uh, London Olympics. They had, built a new stadium, and they built all these new buildings, and then they had all these extra buildings really, really far out in like Hackney, in the pretty east side of London, which had not been a very, economically enfranchised area, let's say. And they made something called the V&A Storehouse.
Hmm.
And every object is equal in this place, and the public can come in, and everything is on this kind of open floor plan on all of these shelves behind big sheets of plexiglass, but really integrated. So decorative arts and furniture and paintings and bronzes and you name it, they're all kind of tapestries. Every kind of medium that they collect is all mixed together. And there's no particular, you know, groupings that separate the artwork out and say, these are the ones that are the classic objects that we all must worship. In
Right.
fact, what you can do is the public can make a reservation, and any 5 objects that they want to see in the collection, the team will pull it out and let you interact with it. They'll give you some gloves, they'll take you to a workroom, and they'll, 2 weeks ahead of time, you pick your objects, you go online. Most everything is digital, which is great. And this is also a big trend. Museums are putting their collections more and more online so that people can play with them.
Right.
A lot of, this Google Arts and Culture where you can play with the images that are open source and copyright free, and people can make artwork with them, but in this situation, you can pull out the artwork and you can actually look at it and touch it. You don't have to be a doctoral student or a professor or something to get
Right.
it there. So I love this model. Um, LACMA here in LA, the LA County Museum, is built a new building. They're just starting their rehang. And instead of saying we're going to have European art in one place and Asian art in another, they're saying, let's do it thematically. Let's do it about, oceans and nature and something about like culinary or whatever their topics are. And they group artworks from different centuries and different continents together to show that in a way, humanity is all looking at things, and making art out of the same basic set of materials. The basic impetuses are the same. And that kind of brings our shared humanity to the forefront. So I think it's the curatorial perspective. It's how do you handle your collections? Open storage is a big trend where people are now able to kind of look into the storage and see how people do the behind the scenes work in a museum. But also it's saying, what are the things that people care about and really, really want to see? And when we were doing the Academy Museum, we were saying like, what are those iconic things that are going to get people in the door
Yeah.
and help to explain why cinema is an art form? What is the creative process behind making movies? And in fact, that's a big story point is that, the artwork, of course, is the finished movie, but who did what? Like, how did the production design and the sound and the acting and the casting and all these things come together? So it drills down on that process and it puts the artist in the driver's seat, the person who was the, visual effects supervisor on Citizen Kane, like explains to you how they did it, you
Yeah.
know? And this is, again, taking that curatorial layer out of the middle and putting you in direct dialogue as a visitor with the creators. And then you get to say like, oh, this is really cool. That's why I'm super excited to see the Steadicam, or I'm super excited to see the ruby slippers or the Jaws shark or whatever, which are all objects that I helped to bring into the museum, because you now understand them in context instead of just saying like, oh, that's a cool thing to look at for 2 seconds as I walk by.
Just love that we're taking down the layers, because as a philosophy guy, the aesthetics movement always has been about that kind of somewhat forced curating. So to let the movement be more democratized sounds pretty great to me, and makes me want to go to a museum. You're making me want immediately right now to go out and take a walk in nature. And then and by the way, nature doesn't have to be, it can be down the street where there are trees.
Yeah, it can be go out your
Walk on
front
the,
door. Just look at the
yeah,
sky, look at the moon, whatever it is,
yeah. Well, I love that the curation, the museum piece of your life intersects with storytelling, because as you tell me stories right now, you're very good at it. And that's one of those things we try to get better at in life generally, is how to understand the stories of our lives and tell them to each other. But how does that intersect, you think, with everything? I mean, film is storytelling. Storytelling is maybe life.
I'd say narrative is life.
Okay.
Narrative is life.
Well, it's pretty big, but that's
It's a big
pretty
statement.
dead on.
But basically, I mean, from the earliest years of our lives, we're being told stories, right? We're
Yeah.
being told the story of our parents, and we're told in our ancestors and children's books and how to make sense of the world. And if you look at basically any contemporary profession, you have to be able to tell a story about why you do what you do and why is it important, right?
Mm,
Um, and for some people, that's more the meat of what they do, what we do. If you are doing a podcast, or you are creating an exhibition, or you're building a museum, or you're making a movie, or you're writing a book, or you're a play or a novel, these are obviously, a lot of those things end up in the realm of what's considered art, and art obviously is quite story driven. But everybody's always telling and curating a story about their own life anyway. I think that's actually one of the things that social media has pointed out tremendously, is that people are now getting this platform to actually tell the best version of themselves, let's say, or the version that they want to share of themselves. Um, and so if everybody knows how to do this, um, it changes the mode of access about who is a storyteller. And it's interesting. I mentioned at the Academy, I co-created the high school media literacy program. And it was, partly it was about like, how do you understand images? How do you decode the tools that filmmakers use to, clearly everybody who's making a movie is trying to put you in a position where you're sympathetic to a particular character, and there's, a story that they want you to follow, and they're moving you through space by the use of the camera and colors and lights and all these kind of things to get you to agree with their perspective. So that's part of the art form of it, right? But apart from just understanding your role as a viewer and how you're being handled, let's say, by the creator, um, it gives you tools to start saying, like, how am I going to be a storyteller of my own life? Do I see people like myself? And what we often used to do in this program is we would have the students actually develop pitches for their own movies, but it had to be grounded in something that was real.
yeah,
And sometimes that meant it was like an anime fantasy, but sometimes it was about, like where
sure.
the neighborhood they were growing up in and the challenges that they had, and the fact that, primarily in Los Angeles, you're dealing with a population that doesn't see themselves on screen all that much. It's primarily, Black and brown and Asian kids, who are not the subject of a huge amount of, positive media
Right.
coverage. Let's put it that way. So I do think that, everybody now has the tools to make a video. Everybody now has the tools to go viral. The question is, how are you going to use that if, in fact, that's one of your goals? How are you going to curate your own personality. How are you going to present yourself? Um, and my argument again is you're going to be so much better at knowing yourself. You're going to have richer content and you're going to have actual friends in the real world if you balance all that stuff out with go and see an exhibition, hear a talk, listen to a political candidate, you know, go join any kind of club that's available to you, whatever your interest and passion is, because that person who is playing chess with you is going to spark something in a conversation, that kind of real world human interaction. It will just literally enhance anything that you want to do, whether you're then using your storytelling, brilliance to go and write code and then go to your, boss in a software company and be like, this is really cool and important because this is how people are going to use it. This is why I'm excited. This is why I'm passionate about it. And I think, again, if you follow this kind of concept, it helps you just tap into what you're passionate about. And then that, I think, makes everybody happier.
I have watched a generation that is different from mine feel differently about the metaverse and have worked on trying to understand what it is. And part of that is it echoes what you say, which is in a room with people, am the happiest person in the room. Because that to me fills me up. It does good things for me. Literally know a guy who was running the program, big programs at Twitch, and he's more comfortable in the metaverse, and that's where he wants to be. It's where he is fulfilled, and he has a different experience than I do. I would gloss over, but it's different for him, which I think is part of what human adaptability does. I mean, we have so many parts of us that are now connected in that way that it's probably transforming how the next generations will be, for better or for worse. I mean, it is what it is, but I do find myself somewhat in an antiquated mode sometimes when I encounter people like we did with Gamers Vote, who are very much in that world and they thrive in it and want to stay in it, which I get.
Right. And, again, I'm not doing a either or by
No,
any
I agree.
stretch. And, I think it's really important. There's a lot more people in this generation anyway, the younger generation, shall we say, who, are not necessarily, there's many more people who are not neurotypical or have been diagnosed as not neurotypical and
Mm-hmm.
recognized that their way of being is okay and doesn't have to be mainstreamed, and doesn't have to just fit in with everybody else, right? There's so many different ways of being intelligent. There's so many different ways of being. And I think that that's a super important thing to put front and center and recognize. And for some people, going into the gaming universe is their version of direct experience because they make friends that way. The question is, can you balance it out? And I think for the majority of young people, in my impression, because I have a couple of, 20-ish,
Sure.
kids, they, so I know some of their friends. And for them, a lot are lonely. A lot, it's, being in that meta world is not the right fit for a lot of people. And it's
Sure.
harder than ever to overcome it. It's harder than ever to, you know,
Step out. Yeah.
step out, get out of your room. And
Yeah.
especially this poor, poor group of kids who went through the pandemic, and had to do virtual learning and didn't have, they've lost a whole set of years of socialization and social skills and understanding how to be together. Um, so I think for the majority of young people, it's still something that really needs to be focused on. And I think one of the just, interesting things that's happening now in education is this movement to ban cell phones in schools. And the kids to give them in a pouch in the morning and they get them back at the end of the day. And it's the parents who are really against it. They're like, I have to be able to call my child at any moment. It's like, no, you don't. When we were kids, there were no phones. My parents didn't know where I was 90% of the time, but and we survived. But what's happening now, the teachers are reporting that the kids are talking to each other, and the lunchroom used to be deadly silent, and now the lunchrooms are noisy. People are talking, they're joking around, they're horsing around, they're causing trouble. Great.
Yeah.
They alive in a way that they haven't been. They're talking to each other in the classroom. They're easier to get their attention anyway. So it's just a really interesting time in our development of humanity, let's say, where we've gone, I think, really far in this direction, and the pandemic compounded it so much that I think we're in a far worse place, obviously, than we would be without having had those lockdowns and those years of homeschooling and virtual living. But maybe we would have gotten there in 5 years from now without a pandemic. I mean, it's so appealing, it's so addictive, it's so omnipresent. And again, I spent my whole career telling people like, this thing's really cool. Like, come and see it in person.
Yeah.
Come watch this film. Come hear this person talk about how they made their artwork or come see this cool collection in a gallery. Come, outdoors and see a movie under the stars. Like whatever I'm offering, there's a million other options out there that will fit pretty much anybody's interest. And there's still a lot of people who are busy trying to like overcome that gap, and it's harder than ever. It's harder than ever to fill cinemas. It's harder than ever to um, sell books. It's harder than ever to get people to show up for in-person events. But when they do, there's something that's really magical about it. People are like, wow, I forgot this was really fun, and for people who want a smaller gathering or a one-on-one or just something parallel play, there's
Yeah.
always those opportunities. Everybody doesn't have to become a big party, animal, social butterfly, whatever, in order for them to find some direct experience that's going to enrich their life and give them that human connection.
I love it. Let's talk film. You have been in and around lots and lots of films. If you could pair any two films together and have some sort of screening that you've never gotten a chance to do or that you've always wanted to do, what two films would you put on as a double feature that I just had to go see?
Oh, that's so funny because I have to say I've always been able to put together any films that I
Anything you want. All right. Well, then why don't we say what do you think the best one was or one that you'd like to do today?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, always the best things were when we had the people who made them, who were thoroughly, whatever, unknown, unseen, were there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I will say, like, one of my favorite films is Harold and Maude, and
Ah, that's
we
great film.
got Cat Stevens, who did the music, who hadn't performed live in, a decade, was a
Yeah.
surprise musical guest. And then,
Wow.
and Cameron Crowe hosted it. And, we had, the actors were there. And, so I love to do that kind of thing. And then, put it in the context of like a Hal Ashby retrospective or something where you start seeing like, all these incredible connections, or how does a career develop, how do people take a film that they were inspired by and build upon it, and something like that. So you could do like show Citizen Kane and Parasite, and just there's so much
Yeah.
that you can do with those kind of interesting comparisons between genre and between decades and between countries and between authors. And um,
Yeah.
that's why I love festivals. I love programming and I love festivals because you can really um, just be so expansive and think on a really broad scale about packaging things in a way that give people a menu of choices, and then like, what's going to really, even if they only come to one thing, they're going to maybe look at the whole program. And, what I love now about festivals, but also about some of the better curated online apps or streamers, like Criterion Collection or Mubi or whatever, is that people get super deep. They say
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like I'm seeing a Kurosawa film and I never saw any of his films. And then they'll go into the whole filmography. And then there's stuff like Letterboxd, again, and
Yeah.
online platform, but it's a great community where people can say like, here's the last 5 movies that I saw and here's what I think about them. And this is what I'm going to watch next. And,
Yeah.
so that's movies, but you can find those mechanisms in any art form or any kind of hobby or any kind of, craft or creative area or sport or, you name it. There's, if you're super into like quilting, you can find this stuff. You can pick any hobby, any interest.
I mean, it is the case that there's more material, and now it doesn't just used to be amazing and rare that Disney would bring their films back because it was a one-way street, and you would see a film, it would be out for a time and it would be gone. Part of what you have done is helped change that equation
Yeah.
by
Well, that's the beauty of
preserving.
archiving, and
Yeah.
it's a big, you have to do a lot of storytelling. You have to do a lot of persuasion. It's something that I call it the life cycle of film.
Hmm.
When you talk to studios or you talk to filmmakers, their perspective, studios is, can I make money off of it?
Right.
If I can't make money off of it, why am I paying to store it?
Yeah.
Because that's expensive and nobody's ever going to see this again. And da da da. And, one thing that upended that idea was home video.
Right.
Even though that's taking things into the home, it became something where all of a sudden they were like, oh, we need more titles to digitize, or we need more titles to
Yeah.
put into home video release or whatever. And now festivals will launch these digital restorations and premieres that we do as archivists. And then, there's an aftermarket for it now. People are actually showing up in person to say, like, I actually want to see that 4K restoration of Jaws on the big screen. And I'm going in person, and if you can't manage to do that, seeing it on a streamer is the next best thing. And people are becoming completists around this, which is really a very, very exciting and valuable thing for archivists because, you've got to convince studios that it's worthwhile. And now, fortunately, a lot of the big festivals have, I've had a film that we digitized in Germany premiere at Cannes Classics. You go and, present it. Everybody, and then we partnered with Arte TV in Germany and then Europe to create Arte Kino Classics, which was a whole European platform every year showcasing like digital restorations from all the archives of Europe and putting them on European TV with 6 languages of subtitles for free. And
Yeah.
and it's one of the most popular things. Millions of people are watching these movies. So you have to convince the gatekeepers, whether it be the owners of the copyright, the studios, the distribution and production companies, or the broadcasters. And then you convince the filmmakers because they're always like, I made a movie. I'm going to raise money now for my next movie. And they forget that unless they're guarding their stuff, a lot of bad stuff can happen to it. Like we've had phone calls at the Academy Film Archive from like depots that were closing because nobody wanted to pay for the film storage anymore. And it was like the original camera negatives and all of the, rough footage unedited from all the Coen brothers movies. And they were like,
It's a lot of material. I mean, it's physically so much, right?
it's,
Yeah.
and fortunately, archives will pull up a truck,
Yeah.
load it up, take it, catalog it, work on it. If you can raise money, digitize it, but at least store it in cold storage,
Yeah.
stabilize. But so much and then you call up the Coen brothers and say, like, did you know your stuff was going in the landfill? And they're like, I didn't even know where it was because I'm on my 20th movie now and I don't know where my second movie is. And a lot of independent filmmakers, this from your background, their stuff is in a box in the attic or under the bed or whatever. And then
Sure.
they move and then formats change. And this is really important for filmmakers to understand is that if you shot something on some version of, film or tape, you may not ever be able to actually watch your material ever again unless a film archive keeps all the tape decks, all of the different flatbeds and projectors alive. Because if, somebody walks in with, a 16 millimeter reel, or a digibeta tape, you can't
SVHS. I mean, there are so many weird formats.
you can't
So,
even look at it without a film
yeah.
archive that, we used to have what we called the graveyard in the basement in Germany of this film archive building, where we would just throw old equipment. We would just harvest decks, and we go down there for parts, and just always try to keep like every one of those iterative versions
Sure.
alive, so that a filmmaker could walk in and be like, I can't watch my movie. I want to, can we restore it? And we're like, let's see if we can even see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then once you preserve, you get back into the sort of the storytelling and the power of storytelling. So not just in our individual lives, but socially. The stories that were told when we were sitting around fires in a cave were stories that help us get from what they allegedly say is 50 people can live together in a community with gossip, essentially, where we're talking, that's how we keep our structures. But beyond that, we split up until we have powerful stories that bind us. So the stories that grew were so often social wide, whether they're the social realities of country, the social realities of religion and beliefs and all those sorts of things that bind us by millions and billions, where probably none of that would be possible, at least if Yuval Noah Harari is correct, the guy who wrote Sapiens. So the storytelling that comes from film is, I think, a very interesting sort of study in how we have taken our stories from being society wide to being available first to filmmakers, right? To creative people and or people with resource who could bring those people together in order to make a film. And now it's so changed. But I'd love to have you talk a little bit about your journey and what you have seen in terms of how storytelling has been so affected by the film, television, and now broader industries.
Well, I mean, obviously there was the development of the novel, and there's been the development of narrative painting and illustration, in sort of the world of art. The birth of photography, and then cinema coming as a primarily moving image storytelling medium,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, has set a standard, I would say, for how we try to communicate information. And again, what I really like about the moment that we're in, and again, it's a little bit technology driven, is that there's a bit of a democratization that's gone on in the last 2 decades with the
Big time.
digital revolution, to the
Big
point
time.
where you don't necessarily need a studio and a big budget and, reels
Yeah.
and reels of expensive 35 millimeter film and a huge crew. Sean Baker's going around shooting, the Florida Project on an iPhone. And, then he donated it to the Academy Museum. And we're like, here, this
Yeah.
movie was made on an iPhone. So, you know, when I did the international outreach project for the Academy, we went all around the world to a lot of countries that had very highly developed film cultures, but had a lot of censorship and kind of needed a moral boost. They needed some kind of, something like Iran or Cuba, for example. But we went to a
Right.
lot of places where the access to storytelling had been very tightly controlled by a very specific number of people. And then the doors were opening, and a lot more people needed some kind of fundamental training in how to structure a narrative, how to because there's a lot of bad scripts out there, and there's
Sure.
a lot of really important building blocks to how do you set the scene, how do you, develop your character, how do you write dialogue, how do you have certain beats in a story, how do you make a conclusion, it's storytelling 101. But one of the things we did is we went to places like, East Africa, to Kenya and Rwanda. We went to Vietnam. We went, to places where, there was an opportunity to help train people, not just in very low tech ways of making and accessible ways of making cinema, but also how to really understand what are those stories that they wanted to tell. And then when we would be in these countries, people would always say things like, oh, how do we compete with Hollywood? How do we build an industry that competes with Hollywood? And I would always say, you don't, and you don't even try, because they've got 100 years on you. There's a lot of, big economic power already, accrued in that zone. You're not going to make, Marvel movies, in Moldova. You're not. But you could make an incredibly impactful narrative or documentary film that is going to tell something very authentic and important about the people. The more regional and local and authentic it is, the more relatable it actually is to a broader set of human beings. I always talk about Asghar Farhadi in Iran and the movie A Separation. When we were in Tehran, we saw an early cut of that movie and crazy for it. And that was one of the reasons Iran decided they would submit it to the Academy for Oscar consideration. And what's so brilliant, and it won, and what's so brilliant about that movie, it's a very specific story. It's set in a world where genders are very constrained, where the ways that men and women interact are completely prescribed by the society. So it could be something that you would watch as an American and say, like, wow, that's outside of my realm of experience. I don't understand it. But in fact, even though the mechanisms of the separation and divorce of this couple were very specific to the Iranian context, it was on a human level 100% relatable, and everybody feels that story, and everybody cries, and everybody identifies with one of those characters because it's so human, and
Yeah.
it's super straightforward and not a very, high tech, expensive movie to make. Um,
Yeah.
so, that is kind of where my perspective is that everybody can be a storyteller. You do need to learn a little bit about how to construct those stories, but you can get the means of production. You can get access to the means of production now in a way that people
Yeah.
never could before.
Yeah. And the amazing thing is that the Hollywood studios are trying to figure out how to compete against individual stories that are what our kids want to watch on YouTube and social media. I mean, because they're genuine, they're not only not Marvel movies, they're low production to no production, but they're voices that are relevant in their world beyond a lot of other things. So it's fascinating that it has changed so much. I love that you have done so much to go out into worlds and encourage people to tell their story, because I think that is the progression of sort of where we've come, is that we have access to those things. It's hard to figure out what when there's so much you should do, which leads to curation. I mean, that's what you have done for a long time, which is help people find things. We're breaking down walls, as you said, in museums, but at the same time, there's so much information. There's so many stories. How do I find my stories? How do I find the things
Mhm.
that enrich my life as opposed to pollute my world?
Right. Um, well, I mean, what I would say is it's important to really think about what is it you're interested in. What are those things that fire you up and that you want to know more about, or that you get just pleasure from interacting with, or is fun for you, or helps you build a community, or helps you find one friend, or just get, if you need that solitude, that takes you into that place where you really feel like you can be your most authentic self, right? So, it's about getting as close to the source of information or the source of that pleasure as possible. Um, and, there's a lot of ways that you can
It's
find
interesting.
mediated and curated content. That's totally great. But there's also ways that you can be, you know, the creator of your own set of community rules. You can say, like, I just really want to get together a bunch of people who love to play my Magic the Gathering cards together, and find a way to do that. Or I'm super interested in you know hiking and wilderness preservation. Like, I'm going up to signing up for the hike on Tree People, or whatever it is. It's about just finding that source of information that is as close to the primary source as humanly possible. And that's why I really like artist curated exhibitions also. And
Hmm.
I really like exhibitions that incorporate the creators so that there's a dialogue with that curator, and it's not so top down as it maybe historically was. Um, I really love, again, it's a digital tool, or a digital format, but there's so many podcasts and storytelling formats now. And what I love is that people love, the Moth Story Hour, to listen to it on the radio or
It's
whatever.
great. It's
But
fantastic.
people
Yeah.
go and they buy tickets to watch somebody read, you know? People will pay like $80 to watch David Sedaris read out loud, you know? Again, it's another way of interacting in a very direct way with the primary source. Um, there's so much that happens with, the 92nd Street Y and the Paris Review, and they just do these live events that are about narrative, and the authors, who are usually like, home alone, not getting any glory, they're front and center, and they have often beautiful reading voices. Honestly, it's just like a great thing. So, um, find out what you're interested and passionate about, and then figure out, where is the most primary source that I can get access to.
I think the primary source notion is brilliant because it's not as hard perhaps as it seems. It seems daunting. It seems as if you'll never be able to have access to or be around those people, but it is a thing now, right? As you see people who have become creators and influencers in all of those media, they're also engaged in live interactions with people that are meaningful as well. And finding as close as you can get to those things that you care about is one thing. From a macroscopic perspective of what we do, what we have done with stories, the impact of story on our universe and the changing universe of shared stories is something that has changed in our lifetime drastically. It used to be that you would have 3 channels that each had prime time and then would turn the channel off in the evening, as
Right, when this
wild as
test
that
pattern came
sounds,
on.
when you would have the test pattern come on, and that was shared experience. So that grew to sell soap into these shared experiences where people would watch The Honeymooners, or they would watch a Norman
Mhm.
Lear show. They
Right,
would,
or the final episode of MASH or Seinfeld or something, and we don't have that anymore.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
not much.
different thing, and I don't know, again, good, bad, indifferent, I don't know that value is worth putting anywhere in there, but I do think it's changed. Everything that you've highlighted along the way in each of the steps you historically outlined, they're all technology-based at some level, and
Sure.
as technology
Similar.
changes,
It is, yeah.
storytelling changes. As storytelling changes, then we have a different experience. I would say our generation, would you agree with me that our generation was probably trained and told who to be and how to be as much by television as we were by our families?
I think so. I think there was a pretty narrow view of who you could be, you know? Um, I mean, was whatever, smarty pants little kid, and so
You're
everybody's
still a
like,
smarty pants.
"That's a smarty pants."
Don't put that in the
So
past
so,
tense, you
like,
smarty pants.
everybody's like, "Oh, she's gonna go to law school," because you could be like a lawyer, a doctor,
Yeah, right,
the plumber,
right.
the dog catcher, or like, whatever.
By
There
the
were
way,
just
you would have
really,
made a great dog catcher.
I
I never
know, right?
thought of it. You
They
would have
were
been
really
awesome.
like, these are the people that I saw in my town, like these were like one of the kids that I went to elementary school with, his father was the dog catcher.
Yes.
So, that was, and when I went to college at Dartmouth with you, and, I thought, okay, fine, I'm going to go to law school or whatever. And I got all passionate about the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. And I became a comparative literature, art history, and, romance
Yep.
languages major, and read, French, Italian, and Spanish literature, and medieval and Renaissance art history, and blah, blah. And my dad was like, you'll never get a job. And then I went to graduate school and, studied cinema studies and comparative literature at NYU. And the whole time I was there, my grandfather thought I was in law school. Like, he just actually thought that that's what I was
Just
doing,
had to be.
because that
Yeah.
was one of the 5 things you could be,
Yeah.
because and, I think TV now is a much broader landscape.
Yeah.
There's so many more ways for people to tell those stories. And one innovation I do think I really like, um, that television does better, or streaming services do better than cinema, is adaptation of novels or
Hmm.
long, complex stories
Yeah.
into these limited series, an 8 to 10 episode arc. You don't have to cram everything into 2.5 hours, or make, God forbid, like a 4-hour movie, and you can really, and it's been interesting to see those shows have a cultural moment where,
Yeah.
they're really self-contained enough that you can binge them, or if you have to wait week to week, for White Lotus or Severance or something, it actually has revived the cultural water cooler conversation that used to happen around, like, did you watch, um, the Brady Bunch last night, kind of thing. Because you
Yeah.
had to watch it when it was on. These the and that's actually been very good for the cultural conversation, I think. Um, there's much more conversation around that than there has been around, you know, uh, I don't know, some of the more conventional, like, long-term, uh, series that are on network television, that are losing audiences. So that's one area that, there it's so funny. There's always a moment in cinema history, and it happens over and over again, where people say, nobody goes to the movies anymore, and
It's
it's
over. Nobody will ever go to the movies again.
because, we're going from silent to sound, or we're going to,
Yeah.
black and
It's
white to color,
done.
or like
Yeah.
television is coming in, and, what are you going to do? Or it's digital, or it's VHS, or whatever, streaming. Um, and people always say to me, like, don't you think streaming is going to be the end of cinema? I'm like, I don't think so. I think what happens when a TV show like, The White Lotus gets a lot of attention, or a film like, Parasite kind of breaks through in the American context, even though it's in Korean, and it's an independently made movie, it drives interest, and people start thinking, like, oh, like, what else can I see? What else do I want to see? Um, and so I think the technological change just, it's still always about storytelling. It's just, how are you going to get to it? How is it being delivered to you? How does it fit into your life? What's the context? What's the conversation around it? And how do you get people excited about seeing it? Because once they do, it builds a fan base, and then everyone's like waiting around for the next season, and you got to wait a year. So what else are you going to watch? What else are you going to watch that's kind of like it, or you think, the algorithm tells you it's pretty interesting, maybe you should try it, And it's been such a boon for, again, diving deeper into directors' filmographies, discovering work from another era. You saw this film noir. Where do I get more of that? It's so cool.
Yeah. I think it is. And the progression, to get back to your original thought, which was, it is good to get out and be with people in environments for whatever reason. Be with
Yeah, and we haven't
humans,
even talked about music.
gather together. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. No,
going
we
to
haven't.
concerts, hearing live music, that's
Yeah.
something that has had a huge upswing since the pandemic. And that is a really successful method of getting people together. And they're having a shared experience. And they've got a story about, like, oh, I saw Taylor Swift. Oh, I did too, kind of thing. I mean, those are the things that, again, give you that water cooler moment that we've been missing in our culture.
Yes. And I am hopeful that there will be storytelling that is positive. Sometimes it's much easier to make, and or audiences are much more drawn to things that I don't know that they necessarily bring our shared experience to good places, because we are witnessing and being a part of tremendous violence, tremendous negativity, tremendous skepticism, narcissism, all of it that just inhabits so much of what content can be when it is just released into market forces alone, right? So this is a business. I made reference to selling soap in television, but not to understand that all of those things are driven, like you said, by studios needing to make money. They're not there benevolently. Usually, I mean, they're wonderful storytelling, meaningful people who are producers and studio executives who care about making meaningful things that are good stories for us in our world. But that doesn't predominate. That is not the business of film, television, and social media. You've been in the trenches, sort of helping present things to people that are stories, deciding what things get in and don't. And I know you're saying we curate less, but how do you make those kind of decisions? Do
We
you
curate.
find yourself in the crosshairs where you go, yeah, I think we should do a little less of the gun violence stuff, and we should try to put some real life stories into play so people remember that we're human?
Right. I mean, I think what I'm trying to say about curation, besides my impetus and my appreciation in bringing people into much more unmediated contact with original objects and creative authors, whether they be
Right.
filmmakers or artists or whatever, is that I think you don't necessarily need to curate less, you need to curate smarter.
Hmm.
And the curating smarter part is we don't censor anything. And this was actually my philosophy in running this film institution. In Germany, in a context where we had a lot of films with really problematic historic content,
Hmm.
things that were anti Semitic, things that were, glorifying the, Nazi regime, things that, things that exist in the real world, right?
Yeah.
Things that are
Yeah.
violent, things that are homophobic, things that are sexist, right? if there if it's got artistic merit as a worthwhile film, let's say, because I'm talking about programming film, what do you do with that stuff, right? And there was this big debate internally in Germany with the other film institutions, because there's a lot of institutions now that have come up with something called a content note, and it's basically a trigger warning thing. And I'm
Hmm.
not a big fan of trigger warning things because I think it allows people to um, just kind of be very reactionary and make assumptions about content rather than dealing directly, dealing in a serious way with
Hmm.
what is the problem with the item. So instead of
Right.
just saying there's problematic content in this movie, warning for parents, don't, if you're worried about problematic content, don't come in here, right?
Right.
What we did is we created something called a context note. And the context note is we are a responsible film culture and heritage institution. We have an obligation to present work that is created by authors and artists without censoring it, but we will not present it uncontextualized or unchallenged. So when you come, be prepared. We are going to have an expert speaker. We're going to have a panel discussion. We're going to take questions from the
Hmm.
audience. We are never going to show anything and just throw it up on the screen and let you walk in, watch it, and leave without having that conversation. And
Yeah,
that's
it's so powerful.
what we did every time.
Yeah.
And that's what we did when we had, um, you know, we had an Oscar on view. We had the Maximilian Schell collection.
Hmm.
It came out that he had been, a sexual offender, and
Right.
behaved inappropriately. There were people on the team that said, "We need to take that off the floor. We can't show that." We can show it. We can show it as an example of an Oscar. We can talk about the history of the Academy Awards. We can talk about the context in which he won it. He won it for an important film, Judgment at Nuremberg, blah, blah, blah. However, by showing it, we're not endorsing the individual. And here is actually much more information. Scan this on the QR code. We have a in-depth explanation of exactly what he was alleged to have done, why it's unacceptable to us on a moral level, and how does that impact the way that we see the roles that he chose to take,
Hmm.
or the kind of public persona that he curated for himself. This is something, and it happens over and over again. I can't tell you how many times people were like, oh, you can't show that in the museum because it's too violent or it's too controversial, or the person has been revealed to have a kind of a Me Too history. Um, and I say yes, yes, and not yes, but it's
Yeah.
because you can't just hide away a bunch of the culture and say like, everybody. You can't never show a Woody Allen movie, you know, but you can't show it uncontextualized. You got to, you can't. You
Yeah.
look at Manhattan. You have to talk about that relationship between him and 17-year-old Mariel Hemingway. You can't just screen it without an introduction and some other really serious scholarship that puts it in context.
Yeah.
And that's the obligation of cultural institutions, I think, in this era of, yeah, a lot of heavy violence and things like that, is that, why is the filmmaker using this? What is this about? Who are they trying to appeal to? Why do you like it? If you're watching it, what primal instincts in us is it, tapping into? What's the appeal? What kind of public reaction did it have? That's why that's why the cultural institution has a very important central role in these times. You know, it has to be something about we have to be able to contextualize, and we have to be able to create a safe space for that conversation.
Well, I think as we wrap up, and we've talked longer than anyone that I've
I win?
actually, yeah, well, it's not a
I know, I'm so
surprise.
competitive.
You and I have been, well, we're neither of us are short-winded, let's be honest.
Sorry about
But
that.
our dialogue will continue long into life, but we always try to wrap up with something that helps us find good information. And I think you kind of started a little bit with that. So there may just not be another book in, but you came with some idea of something that you can help me get information better so that I am better informed in a world full of information. So
Right.
what was that?
Well, I think, you know, you can probably look at me and say like, okay, she's reading, I can tell you what she's reading. You can look at people and say like, she reads the New York Times and she reads the New Yorker and she drives a Volvo, like she's, you know, so it's very important again to put things in a bigger context and take yourself out of your comfort zone, you know? And the issue about where you're finding authoritative information, again, get as close to the original source as you possibly can. Find writers whose perspective you admire and can respect, but you have to read a lot of their stuff, to see, and you have to be ready to watch and listen to the other side, and if you can't go to a public talk, by, whoever, in your local area, you can hear, you can listen and make up your own mind, because everybody has a TED talk. Everybody has something out there that you can, listen to and react to. And then it's very, very important as you do this exercise to kind of come up with your baseline values. What is it that I am trying to achieve from this experiment? How broad a viewpoint am I willing to embrace?
So who do you go to? Where do you go? So to help me know, not just broadly, I need to go
Yeah.
and find somebody or somebodies that I trust the information they're providing. Is there any one or ones or
I have to say, I mean,
source?
I am very, Catholic in the small c kind of
Hmm.
way of, trying to pull in a lot of different information. Um, and I don't have anybody that I think is 100% perfect, except for Maggie Haberman at the New York Times.
All right. Well, that's
I think that I
somebody.
trust her.
Maggie. All right.
I trust that when she reports a conversation that happens at the White House, that she really has her ear to the ground. But that's just my own little predilection. Um, but I'm trying really hard to, because we all have people in our lives from different political perspectives, right? We all have relatives, or we all have people that we care about that don't see eye to eye with the way that we are. So listen as broadly as you can, but it's also okay to say, this person is outside of my boundaries because I feel that they engage in hate speech, or they engage
Yeah.
in, behaviors that for me are, um, you know, against my moral code, whether it be, anti-women, or homophobic, or whatever your boundary is. Find find that, you know, central core, and then see see if you can understand where other people are coming from by going to those primary sources and saying, what are they actually saying, and why is it appealing to them? You know, what is it about that argument that works for those people? Because even if I oppose it 100%, I'm going to want to be able to put it in context and articulate. I've learned how to do that in the world of presenting cinema in historical contexts, because most of the time you can look back and say, like, oh, well, this is what happening in the 30s, and that's why this movie says this thing.
Yeah.
But the challenge is now. The challenge is, how do we have that perspective when, in fact, in 10 years or 15 years is when you'll be able to really write an authoritative history book on what has happened this week in the US.
And I dare to add to that all history is wrong every time. And so the best information that you can get, it's not going to be right. Rashomon, the great movie that we
Right,
always refer to, with 5 perspectives that we're all witnessing the same thing, and we don't see it all eye to eye.
right.
But it's great to get the best information we can, act on it. And Ellen Harrington, star behind the star of the stars,
Oh,
thank you
that's
so
hilarious.
much for joining us on SmarterUmedia. And
Yay.
everybody, don't forget today to stay curious and stay open, because that's how life works and gets better and better. So thank you. Come back,
Okay.
Ellen.
Hey, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.